I'm a huge Walking Dead fan. I've watched the whole series front to back 3 times, and even after all that, I couldn't shake this one thought. As a Black woman, would I really want to exist in the Walking Dead universe? Would my story resemble that of Michonne's, Sasha's, Jackie's? Because as much as I love the show, something about their stories just never sat right with me. After rewatching the series for the 3rd time, I came to a disappointing but unsurprising realization. To be a Black woman in The Walking Dead is to be misunderstood, used, underestimated, brutalized, and dehumanized, which in a world full of actual zombies feels like a cruel joke. In this video, I want to talk about the contrast between how white women and Black women are portrayed and treated in The Walking Dead. This will not be an in-depth breakdown of every character's full arc, and this will probably make the most sense if you've already seen the show. If you notice anything I missed or had additional thoughts of your own, you're welcome to drop them in the comments. All right, let's get into it. Andrea. Very divisive character from The Walking Dead. Andrea's character often seemed disconnected from the world around her. She was never particularly perceptive, even in the moments when she had a chance to reflect quietly and alone. She exhibited a dangerous level of naivete that not only put her at risk, but also jeopardized the safety of those around her. Andrea's delusion was persistent, almost to a threatening degree, which I'd argue is a luxury often afforded to those with inherent privilege. She consistently sought male validation and approval, signaling helplessness while simultaneously touting her fiercely independent persona. A prime example of this is the time she literally shot my boy Daryl, seemingly to prove to the men around her that she could handle being on threat watch alone. Like, y'all, this isn't even in my script, but the level of anger she felt, which I'm not gonna lie, I can kind of relate, but like when she was being asked by Lori and the others just to cook the dinner with her, like I kind of get where she was coming from. But girl, you shot Daryl. But perhaps the most telling moment of Andrea's journey was her tragic relationship with the governor. She didn't fall for him because of the community he built or the illusion that he was rescuing her and Michonne. No, Andrea craved his approval, his affection, and his love. It's worth noting that while Andrea desperately sought love from the governor, Michonne had been the one showing her love through her actions since the very day they met, the day that Andrea nearly got eaten alive by walkers. Beth had a tendency to romanticize the past, clinging to an almost fairy tale view of the world that was long gone. I mean, let's be real. Beth seemed to lean into her unaliving threats more for attention than actual intent. And feel free to challenge me on this, but I stand by it. Beth constantly sang at inappropriate moments. She was disrupting the already tense atmosphere. Like, girl, why are you sitting here busting out into this like messed up rendition of some song that no one's ever heard? For your moment, this is not American Idol. This is Zombie Apocalypse. When the entire group got separated after the prison, she also sought alcohol, not as a survival necessity, but as something it, quote unquote, represented to her. Those were her words. She neglected real survival needs in favor of seeking something that was more about nostalgia than necessity. The episode with her and Daryl in the cabin still frustrates me to this day because even though Daryl tried to bring her back to reality, reminding her that the apocalypse was far from a fairy tale, he ended up softening towards her naive optimism. This response felt especially out of place because Daryl had been steadfast, unyielding in the face of hardship up until then. In comparison, I'm thinking specifically about his negative outburst towards Carol back on the farm when she was trying to find positive moments in her day after her daughter passed. Beth, at only 16 or 17, mind you, also had multiple men falling for her, leading them to protect her subsequently. So this included Carl, I would argue Daryl as well, her fiance at the farm, if you remember that, and even her boyfriend at the prison. Despite being essentially useless in contributing to their survival and the group's survival as a whole, she was valued under the sexist notion of what makes a female desirable in a patriarchal context. White, young, blonde, innocent, and in need of protection. Traits that made her easy to really control in a world that had no longer made sense to these men. Jessie made her move on Rick almost immediately upon meeting him, offering to cut his hair and invading his personal space. Now, you guys think about it. Count on your hands. How many times did Rick let someone get that close to him after their first meeting, aside from when Glenn saved him in the beginning of the series? Like, just think about it. Take a moment. And let's not pretend it was just because they were now in Alexandria, because Rick was still cautious and distrusting of pretty much everyone else. Jessie quickly caught on to Rick's interest in her and flirted back with him, perhaps seeking the affection she wasn't getting at home. But, instead of maybe seeking genuine affections from, say, her children, she opted to seek circumstantial affections from a stranger like Rick, someone who was vulnerable, traumatized, hurting, disillusioned. He was just looking for some kind of sense of familiarity in that moment. This is particularly selfish behavior because she had the privilege of spending most of her time sheltered in Alexandria, kept away from the walkers. But she took an easy opportunity to gain affections from a man who was quite literally and quite obviously actively experiencing and processing trauma. All this was happening while she was being abused by her husband. This dynamic hints at something deeper. Jessie could be seen as a representation of the trophy wife character, even in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. In this case, her value was tied up in her relationship to a powerful male character, say Rick. It's worth noting how quickly Rick developed an attraction to Jessie compared to how long it took for him to even show interest in Michonne, who, mind you, had been taking on maternal roles for his very own children. Roles that Rick seemed to deeply admire in his late wife, Lori. With Michonne, there was no slow burn. I don't even want to hear that argument. Rick never appeared to develop any romantic feelings for her, even as she continuously showed emotional strength and competency, traits he apparently valued when it came to his family as a whole. But with Jessie, despite her flaws and the obvious trauma she was experiencing from her abusive relationship, Rick's affection seems to come very quickly. This discrepancy adds another layer to the way Jessie is treated. Her value, in part, comes from her relationship to Rick, her proximity to power, rather than her own inherent qualities or contributions. Ultimately, Jessie's pursuit of Rick wasn't about wanting protection from her abusive husband. It was about seeking a distraction, an escape from the harsh reality of her life. The audacity to pretend that Rick's desire to protect her in the end was causing problems in her life was very telling, highlighting how her narrative is framed around being someone who needs saving, yet rejects the very thing that could offer her redemption. Now, this storyline in The Walking Dead is one that is often forgotten because it happened so early on. And it's honestly one of the saddest, and it's kind of what inspired me to start writing some thoughts about this show. Jackie's story is one of quiet erasure. I don't even know if you would remember her by her name if I didn't show her photo on the screen, but when the group reaches the CDC, Jackie decides to stay behind with the scientist as the building self-destructs. Andrea also decides to stay, but Dale chooses to sacrifice himself with her, as if she were incapable of making her own decision. Dale doesn't even offer Jackie a singular word of encouragement or comfort, as if her life wasn't worth saving. Perhaps the idea is that Jackie was perceived as someone who had already made her decision rationally, someone whose strength and resolve were assumed based on being, a Black woman, but let's not get too deep into that yet. By contrast, Andrea was seen as an innocent, naive woman who didn't understand the gravity of staying behind. Jackie's act of strength was shown as the quiet decision to die. Think about what I just said. How insulting is it for your act of strength and courage to be literally unaliving yourself. Why do Black characters have to unalive themselves or sacrifice themselves for a white counterpart in order to be remembered positively? The absence of any words of life or encouragement being spoken into Jackie was stark. No one speaks life into her, unlike Andrea, who had a man willing to die with her. For Jackie, her strength was seen as something that didn't need affirming. Maybe because it was too quiet, maybe because it was too self-assured. Jackie's death is not heroic or emotional, it's simply erased. Before Michonne ever steps onto the scene, her life has already been shattered. She lost her child, her husband, and everything else that tied her to her past. Even with that, she survived alone for months and months before meeting Andrea, managing to self-sustain and navigate a world overrun by walkers. When they finally meet, she immediately takes on a protective role of Andrea, caring for and shielding her during times of their travels. Yet Andrea, who later finds herself trusting the governor over Michonne, doesn't respect Michonne's judgment. She even throws her under the bus, ultimately allowing Michonne to leave Woodbury alone, aka being exiled. To add insult to injury, Michonne then faced a flurry of attacks while trying to escape. Michonne's first encounter with Rick is just as disappointing when bringing back the baby formula Maggie and Glenn had left behind when they were abducted. He's openly skeptical of her, even willing to sacrifice her life for the governor for the chance to save his prison community. But Michonne, in true form, forgives him and says, "I understand why you would have done it." Michonne, what? I'm sorry, I feel like that line was not fitting for her character. And even then, that statement received no follow-up or any thoughts of remorse from Rick. It was just the weirdest thing. I remember when I would watch the season over and hear her say that, I was like, what are you talking about? This speaks to Michonne's capacity for understanding and empathy time after time in this show. I mean, I can make you a list ad nauseum how many times she's been empathetic, despite the harsh treatment she often endures. Over time, she proves to be one of the few people whose advice Rick consistently ignores, even when she's right, especially regarding Alexandria. Her ideas are often questioned, while her actions, whether it's taking on the maternal role for Carl and Judith or offering practical advice, are undervalued. Funny enough, though, Rick seems to trust her to take care of his children in his absence more than in any other area of her involvement. After the fall of the prison, Michonne spends a few days dissociating when she's found herself to be alone and returns to the familiar of immersing herself amongst the walkers. She suddenly has the epiphany of realizing the importance of her newfound family unit, Rick, Carl, and Judith. Shocking to no one, when she finds them, they're struggling to find their footing, and Rick is severely incapacitated. I don't mean to laugh because this is not funny, but the irony of it is funny to me, so I'm trying not to giggle. I also find it interesting that the show seems to limit the portrayal of Black female characters as too self-sufficient, especially in Michonne's case. Michonne, for example, is framed as needing to find her people again, Rick, Carl, and Judith, in order to reconnect with her sense of self, when we as the audience know that that's not really true. Michonne, in essence, is self-sufficient, which, that will go into other conversations of when are Black women allowed to not be those things. Sasha's experience is a heartbreaking display of emotional abandonment in a world that constantly demands resilience from her. At one point, she lies on a bed of walkers, preparing to burn them outside of Alexandria. She's clearly melting down quietly and also a lot of times loudly with how she expresses herself, yet no one is ever there to console or protect her. I can think of the multiple times where she would have an outburst and walk off or run off or have a panic attack, and no one was ever there. Someone tell me if I'm tripping, but she was always just left to herself. All anyone does is criticize her for not processing her grief quickly enough. Okay, so let's think back. Sasha's boyfriend, the only one who truly saw past her hardened exterior, passed away, if you guys remember Tainted Meat. Then her brother, who should have been there to support her, tries to relate to her pain by saying he had gone through something similar instead of just letting her grieve in her own way. And guys, if you remember, the way he was trying to relate to her was like from his like 2-day fling he had with that woman at the prison. But I'm not trying to judge. That's his own story, whatever. Then, not even 2 weeks later, her brother died as well. And as I might also add, for a lot of Black men in this show, die in the stupidest ways. Like, he died in a way that didn't need to happen at all. He got bit by like a kid walker, like a baby walker. And then Everybody Hates Chris. We can't even talk about it. You guys know. Rest in peace. So yeah, her brother passed. And let's not forget, just as Maggie lost Glenn on that fateful night with Negan, Sasha also lost Abraham. Now, this was the first person she was able to open up to in a very long time, since she had found herself, quote unquote, completely alone, even within the group, after her boyfriend's passing and her brother's passing. The show still posits Maggie's grief as more intense and justified, given the amount of screen time that it got, while Sasha's character goes directly back into a hard exterior and is set on exacting revenge rather than having the luxury of grieving like Maggie. Now, one could say that Maggie also went into this sort of immediate, like, I need justice sort of mode, but also I feel as though Glenn was memorialized in his relationship with Maggie several times over that of Sasha with Abraham. Like, I feel like that was never touched again. Sasha, like Michonne, bears the weight of survival and emotional labor largely alone. She's forced to process her trauma in ways that others are not, and even when faced with overwhelming loss, she's harshly criticized for not being strong enough. Her emotional outbursts are treated as nothing more than an inconvenience to those around her, as though she's expected to endure without the space to grieve. Sasha's final moments only reinforce this painful trope of Black women being required to carry their burdens silently. In her last scene, she's alone in a dark coffin. Like, guys, what? She's alone in a dark coffin, listening to music as she waits for the pill she's taken to end her life given to her by Eugene. The last time we see her, she becomes a catalyst for the group's survival, giving her friends in Alexandria the opportunity to strike against Negan's forces first. Even then, she's relegated to being a walker. Her sacrifice was reduced to a tragic, silent act rather than a moment of true recognition or agency. Now, one could argue that she took it into her own hands how her story ended, but I think the main point here is the way the writers posited this situation put her in the same sort of silent suffering as someone like Jackie, for example. In The Walking Dead, the white female characters are often insulated by the privilege that comes with patriarchy and their race. Characters like Andrea, Beth, and Jesse have opportunities to grow and learn from their mistakes, usually supported by the men around them. Their flaws, whether it's Andrea's naive search for validation, Beth's nostalgic clinging to the past, or Jesse's simple flirtations with Rick, are framed as misunderstandings. I'm just trying to get some safety, whether it's an emotional safety, a physical safety, a psychological safety, Their mistakes are often viewed as temporary setbacks in their character development, and they're allowed the space to evolve and receive support, both from others and from the system around them that existed pre- and post-apocalypse. In contrast, the Black female characters, Michonne, Sasha, Jackie, and others, are typically subjected to a harsher, more dangerous world. Their vulnerability is met with judgment and rejection, not care or protection. While Andrea can lean on others for emotional survival, Michonne, having lost everything, is forced to shoulder her trauma alone. Sasha is expected to process her grief quickly, while Jackie's strength was tragically ignored by most viewers. Michonne's experiences, particularly her competence being questioned by Rick, highlight how the Black women of the show are often doubted, even when they're the most capable in the room. Even when the white women attempted to have their heroic arcs, their actions often come off as reactionary. It's usually the result of them losing some sort of privilege they once had and feeling like they have no other options, like it's their last way out, last resort sort of thing. For example, Andrea's attempts to save others felt more like an expression of her desperation to reclaim control, not a true moment of growth. The Black female characters, on the other hand, aren't afforded such narrative luxury. Their strength isn't seen as a way to grow, but it's seen as a form of survival. Their moments of softness are fleeting, and they only appear when they're romantically or sexually involved with a man. Otherwise, they're expected to be relentlessly strong, even when it costs them their emotional well-being. These differences underscore the way race and gender intersect in the series, leaving Black women with fewer opportunities to be quote-unquote soft, in an apocalypse. Like, let's use that word with a grain of salt, but fewer opportunities to be soft and more often questioning their place in a world that rarely provides them the luxury of vulnerability. So the next time you're watching a show or a movie, ask yourself, how are the women of different races being portrayed? Are they given space to be flawed, to make mistakes, or even to be strong in their own way? And more importantly, how do these portrayals shape the way we perceive people in our real lives? Are we accepting these narratives without question, or are we challenging and subverting them in our daily actions, conversations, and interactions? Because the way we view characters in media does shape how we view people in real life. If we're truly looking to subvert these toxic and sometimes subconscious narratives that are being created in media, we have to start with how we engage with the media we consume and how we treat the people around us, especially those who've been forced to survive in silence.